Right, morning, welcome everybody. Today we are falling off cliffs or something. I think as Jasper suggested yesterday, we get to that tipping point, you know, as you sort of teeter on the edge and the brink, and you know, who knows what's going to happen when you go over. So yeah, what's the tipping point? What it's all about? What is it all about, Lee? I don't know.
Well, actually, I thought to hand the baton over to Jasper because he raised it as a question, and I'd love to hear, you know, why it is important to him and some ideas that he has. So, and then I can add something into the mix as we go.
Alrighty. So Jasper, by the fireside, you're on the spot.
Yeah, no, thanks, Lee. You're becoming good at delegating. Yes, I think, well, I was more prompted by all the speakers before me yesterday in just the open mic session. And somehow the word tipping point just popped in my head. But and what I was thinking along the lines was to say that if we look back on our lives, we were probably heading 100 miles an hour in a certain direction, fully believing in what we're doing and whatever the case may be. And then a series of events started to happen in our lives. It started to maybe give us a sign to say, listen, this path is not going to work out. And then there was a tipping point. So that tipping point could be something small, but if you think back on it, that was the final straw. And then you said, all right, you know what? And then you move 180 degrees away from what you were doing. And you were looking back in hindsight now, you're very happy that you reached that tipping point because it opened up a whole new world of possibilities. And I think Malcolm Gladwell also wrote a book on it, Tipping Point. And he made it, he came from an angle to say, look at overnight successes. It's been years and years of slogging and hard work to get there. And then I think the band, the Beatles, for instance, they were singing in backstreet bars and honing their craft in writing songs and singing, something to the tune of 10,000 hours. And then they were discovered, and then they were an overnight success. And even a guy like Bill Gates, he was working away after school in labs and access to computers and crafting his skills. So a tipping point can be you paid the price, and now the success is finally coming. It could be that. But tipping point could also be the last straw kind of analogy to say, you know what, this is it. And I remember I was pretty much going full blast on my corporate career. And the last company I was working for, the Housing Trust, we had, and I thank him still for to today, to be such an incompetent, bully idiot, because he was the kind of person that made me realize, listen, if you pursue this path, there's many more like him down the road for you. And are you going to allow this kind of moron to have that effect on your life? And I remember every morning on a Monday morning walking into those halls where I was almost giving myself a self-talk to say, you know, this is only temporary. And whenever this guy was going on his rants and raves and bullying tactics, quietly I was saying, thank you, because you're making up my mind. Because it's scary to just do a drastical decision on your own, but if you have such a kind of influence, it becomes easier and easier. So I think with that as an influence, I would like to hear from the rest of the people, your tipping point, either in terms of a breakthrough, and then looking back, it took you 10 years to become an overnight success, or a tipping point to say, you know what, that's it. Final straw, I'm not made for this corporate rubbish. And go out on your own. And it was still a long journey, but I'm thankful for that guy way back. That was my tipping point.
Thanks, Jasper. Sure, I'm starting to get really worried about the direction the elders in this group are taking us over the last couple of days. Yesterday, Trevor was all about people that are rubbish, and Jasper's calling them idiots and morons today. So this is getting serious stuff. So I think we better get across to the gentleman in the group. So Edward, let's come across to you and find out what your tipping point is all about, and whether you have similar people in your environment that these two do.
Yeah, I'm glad we've got Lee in the group to balance us out, because I think I remember her saying that in her family there was an agreement that they didn't call anyone stupid. And I think that's a really good. We might have stupid behaviours, silly behaviours, but as a person we're not. I hope my sound's all right, because I've got internet problems this morning. But I was thinking about the models, because I think when you think about tipping point, you almost automatically think about a seesaw or a balance, and that can be a good analogy to use, but it also depends on how you put the weights on there, because if you gradually put the weights on, it has a different effect than if you suddenly put the weight on. And if you think about not having a job, when you retire, that's a completely different thing from when you get sacked or made redundant unexpectedly. So I think how you put the weights on has a bearing. And of course, if you drop a big heavy weight on one end of a seesaw, you either break it or the other person goes flying off the end. So how you apply that pressure is important. And then I think actually the seesaw's not the right model. And I don't know whether you had those witches' hats roundabouts in South Africa. They're like a sort of cone on a spindle. So it's a round thing that balances. So how you apply pressure in different points affects how it goes. So if one person sits one side and two people sit the other side, it tips up. But if three of you are equally spaced, it doesn't tip up. So I think that's another model worth thinking about. And then there's that whole thing about if you've got a container, you can fill it with rocks, but there's still room for pebbles, and then there's still room for sand, and then there's still room for water. So again, it's what you put in. And of course, you can very soon fill a container with sand or water, but it depends how many rocks you've thrown in there first. So that's a different thing. It could be that, it's a drip, or it's a big lump coming in. And then I think if you think in terms of maybe a pond being filled up with an outlet, then you never reach a tipping point unless that outlet gets blocked, in which case the pond overflows. And I think that's very similar to the situation we're in now. Some of us might live in houses we really don't like, but we can cope because we go out in the evening for a nice meal, or we go out at weekends for a weekend away, and we can't do that during COVID. So that release is gone. And therefore we get very frustrated, and we reach a tipping point because we can't do stuff that we like to do. So I think it's a very complex thing, tipping points. It's not just, a balance one way or the other. It's a whole mixture of stuff. And I think COVID has really changed things a lot because we can't do stuff we were doing. We haven't got that release. We're stuck indoors with all the children. We're stuck indoors with our partners, which is a good thing sometimes, a bad thing other times, because we can't get away. So I think, it's a really complex issue. And for me, the tipping point came when I left the corporate world, really because a lot of rocks dropped into my container, but that didn't force me out. Then lots of little bits filled it up. So there's a couple of really big events, which I think I touched on in my story. And then there was a small event which made me think, I'm leaving the corporate world. I'm going off. I'm going to run through deserts, and I run through Scotland. I'm going to camp on the moors. I'm just going to be a hobo. So that's my thoughts.
Thanks, Ed. Yeah, sure. All the way from seesaws to hobos in a couple of minutes. I'm not sure whether you've tip my mind over the edge with all those different analogies. But yeah, thanks for that. So I think we have to go across to Steve after all of that, because Steve, you've got to sort this mess out for us. So.
Let's make it more complex. Yeah, I thought I'd just tell you a brief story from my life in terms of tipping point. That started a 2-year journey that led to where we are as a family right now. And I was working as an HOD for 2 private schools from Johannesburg, running their outdoor centers out in Magaliesburg. And we were just at the point, I thought, at consolidating operations with a view to move forwards in a certain direction. And all of a sudden, my board, the 2 heads of my board, went dark on me and disappeared off the map for like 4 or 5 weeks. And I started to realize that something was afoot. And then I tracked them down and said, right, we need to have a meeting. And I went in and they said they'd completely changed their minds and were going in the opposite direction. And that was a big rock that dumped into my basket externally that I hadn't chosen. I was quite certain that I was plowing another 5 to 10 years into a certain direction. And that started a chain of events. So that process that Ed talks about, with some of the rocks start to fill in and things start to change and take shape. But that was a good tipping point that pushed me over a cliff that I wouldn't have jumped probably on my own at that point, and meant that I could now be doing the work that I do now and live the way that I live at the moment with my family. And so that was a memorable tipping point in the last, that was about 6 years ago now. Yeah.
Great, thanks, Steve. Right, Mpumelelo, let's see what's tipping you over the edge apart from getting back to school. So,
morning everyone again. I've had a couple of tipping points, and I think one of the things I used to go through back then was just the anxiety and the worry about how are things going to turn out. But there's been quite a number of tipping points to a point that the worry is no longer as strong as it used to be, because I've seen how even when one has gone through a tipping point, things interestingly take an interesting direction. So in terms of career, my career it's been changing almost every 10 years. Every 10 years, something new comes and the direction completely goes a different way. When I started out as a young man, I was completely sold that I was going to be a musician. I even when I was working to save money to record an album, to do all that needed to be done, which I actually did. It didn't turn out the way I expected, but out of it came the wonderful wife that I have, because I met her when I was going to sing in Lesotho. And then for 10 years, I did advertising. I was quite happy there because it's a creative environment. So it sort of spoke to my creative side of me. But it got to a point where I got retrenched. And by then I'd been wrestling for a year that I must leave the corporate world. So when that happened, it was almost just pushing me the correct direction. I got into research, which I enjoyed immensely. And not so long ago, I did a project for Anglo that completely changed what I've been doing as a business, not only doing research, but now looking into leadership. So I guess my lesson out of that is that sense of feeling like you are out of control when things change is actually not a bad thing. We don't have to be in control of everything in our life that we feel we have to hold on to and correct. Sometimes the direction, as much as we don't know what it is, can reveal more and exciting things. I'll keep it there.
Great, thanks, Mpumelelo. Yeah, sounds like your tipping points have got a 10-year cycle to them. So yeah, it's interesting how these things go. So let's get across to Lee and see where she was going to take us. So Lee, seeing that you tossed the ball to Jasper in the beginning, I think we'll have to come back to you.
You know, I couldn't help but dig out my copy of The Tipping Point by Malcolm Gladwell, and just to look through what it was that he was talking about. And I realized a lot of those, it was actually, his book was itself a tipping point in terms of a lot of the language that we use today and our concepts. And so I went, I think his, you know, it was so well researched, and And there are some principles there that were such a good reminder to me of some of the things that we don't only have to wait. So I'm going almost in the opposite direction to Mpumelelo, although I love the idea that we don't have to be in control of everything. But I also, what the point that Malcolm Gladwell is saying is that there's certain things that we can do to create tipping points. And they often are counterintuitive. So this idea of we have to build a great number of people, for example, before things tip in the direction that we want them. And whereas the principle from Gladwell's book is the law of the few. And he talks about connectors, mavens, and salespeople. So connectors having wide networks, mavens are people who are experts in their field and make powerful recommendations, not to persuade, but because they have that insight and people are drawn to their expertise. And the salespeople who then say, convey that message in persuasive ways. So it just takes a few people. In fact, he talks about, one of the things he talks about in terms of context is that a group of 150 is really the ideal group, because that is how many connections it seems that our brain as humans can actually deal with. So if you wanted something to grow, you would want to create lots of groups of around 150. And that then becomes these nodes that then build exponentially. And then the last thing I want to mention is what he calls the stickiness factor. And that we can't predict. We don't know what the stickiness is that's going to say, this is the idea, this is the product, this is the moment. We actually have to keep testing. And he uses Sesame Street as an example of an organization that tested almost every episode with children to see where is the stickiness, what do we need to change. And so you're constantly testing, trialing, putting it out, trying again, doing something different. And so I thought those were great, just great ideas. And they certainly, having just gone back to the book, they prompted my thinking, just even about Wisdom's Chats, is how do we create a stickiness? How do we build, further? How do we create a tipping point within Wisdom's Chats that we can, so that's what stimulated my thinking.
Great, thanks Lee. Right, Master, let's come across to you next.
Yeah, thanks. I actually tried to look at what the meaning of this tipping point can be and what it means, because some of the things that I thought were tipping points were just disasters that happen in your life and tend to change your life to a particular direction. And I think my tipping point was when I had to make a decision to leave the teaching profession, which was regarded as security, and everybody else around me was bringing in that sort of anxiety and saying, you can't leave this profession. I remember my father had to consult so many people that had so much influence in me to say, you cannot leave this job because it's secured, you'll get your pension and stuff like that. And that taught me how different people view different issues of life and what they value in life. And some of the things that people tend to value in life has got so much influence in terms of how you would like to lead your own life and pursue a particular vision. So yeah, that is one of those tipping points. Of course, the latest was the disaster that I shared the other time. I mean, I never thought at a particular point of my life I would be sitting with another title called a divorcee or something like that, and how to navigate life almost alone, and having lived the life of family for quite a number of years, and yeah, have to learn to live with people with stigma of some sort. So it becomes quite a challenge. But I've also found that in that particular process, you get to learn and connect differently with different people, because for so many years we've been relaxed and you never thought of anything that would change your life drastically. And yeah, you have to navigate and start to relate to other people differently. There are those that would not even want to see you anymore, you know, and you've all these years you've been valuing them, you've been holding them in high esteem. So I think what one has learned over different tipping points of one's life is that you need to hold on to the author and the finisher of your faith, your life, because that keep constant, doesn't change. And every tipping point you have that pillar of strength to hold on to. Yeah.
Good. Thanks, Master. Some wise words again from you. Thank you. Cecile, let's come across to you next.
Hi. If I was thinking about my work life and the tipping points, then it came to mind that when I was, I studied radiography, so I was a radiographer, and I loved being a radiographer. I loved the work, I loved the interaction with patients, I just loved being a radiographer. But the one December, and I was working for government at that time, and that one December, 2 Decembers before that, when we were on holiday, someone always used to say to me, Cecile, why don't you come and work for us as a pharmaceutical rep? You've got the ideal personality, this, that. And I said, no, I love radiography. And then the next December, when we got there again to the beach, he said the same thing. And it was time we used to get bonuses in December. And when I looked at my salary, I could hardly see there was a bonus included with the salary. So it was at that time it was something nice to hear. Okay, I would be earning a salary plus commission. So when I got back, I resigned, and I got the job as in the pharmaceutical company. So I was there for many years, and then so that was my first tipping point. Then my second, so then I was a sales manager. I was in the pharmaceutical company as a rep, and later as a national sales manager. And someone that played squash with me came to me and said he needed a sales manager in his telecoms company. And I thought, no, man. But he said he will. I don't know what made the tipping point there, but I said yes. And I worked for him. Then while I was working there, probably about 7 years into working there, that book, Who Moved My Cheese, was doing the rounds. So I gave I read it, and I gave it to a lot of my reps that were kind of not doing well at that time. And then I won the incentive to Rio, a sales trip. And in Rio, the guys from the finance company told me, why don't you start your own company? Which I thought, no, I can't do this. But they kind of convinced me. And then I realized afterwards that book, Who Moved My Cheese, it didn't move any of my reps, it moved me. And I left telephone brokers and I started chit-chat. And that is 16 years ago. So I don't know, my cheese had been moved to my own company, and some days I regret it, but being my own boss and just being responsible for my own destiny, apart from the spiritual part, has been good. And I don't think I will go back to corporate ever again. I did say when I retire and I moved to Jeffreys Bay, there is a hospital, I will go back to radiography just because I love the job. So that may complete the circle. And I'll go and do radiography maybe just as a volunteer, just because I love it. So yeah, so those were my business tipping points. And as you know, I was married to a guy who was a teetotaler. And when my daughter was, when Cindy was about, from the time she was about 11 or so, 12, he started drinking. And I didn't know, because I was in the middle of this corporate job, I didn't know how much he was drinking. Until one day, Cindy and I came home, and they had known because they were home in the afternoon. So one afternoon we came home from a swimming gala, and instead of being at work where he was at his own company, he was lying on the couch with a half-empty bottle of beer next to him, and he was sleeping at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And my daughter took the half bottle of beer, and she was so angry, and she chucked the half bottle of beer over him. And that was my tipping point to say, no more, I'm not taking this family through being an alcoholic in the family. We've tried a few things, but it didn't work. I am doing the tough love thing, and I'm moving the kids away from that, because they don't need to be non-drinking alcoholics. And that was a tipping point as well. It didn't turn out well for him later, but it made my kids strong, and it made me the person I am today. So those were my tipping points.
Thanks, Cecilia. And Cecilia, I highly doubt that you'll ever retire. I just can't see you sitting still and doing nothing, that's for sure. So yeah, thanks for that. So Una, new on the block today. I think you've sort of got the gist of how things are going here. So welcome, and yeah, your thoughts on the discussion so far.
Thank you very much. It's lovely to be here and for the invitation. Yeah, it feels like I'm still waiting for my big tipping point. It feels like I'm still sort of working on it. And on the one hand, I'm never too sure if I need to step back a bit more and wait more, or should I push more? And I think that's sort of what you touched, Lee, is it's a bit of an art to know when you need to push and when you need to just stand back a bit so that the magic happens. But I really believe one needs to be active in it. So you need to show up at least and need to do your part. So, and then that builds momentum. And at some point, it just unfolds. So I think that's, with other things career-wise, a few here and there, but I think I've always been sort of on this mission that it feels like there's something more, and I haven't quite really sort of found my way in it. Maybe I never will, maybe that's just life. So yeah, I think my tipping points was more in my life around relationships. I'm quite good at when things doesn't align with, when things are not aligned, or we're not aligned anymore, to sort of put an end to relationships. And I think some of those I've done quite harshly in the past, and I've learned to be more gentle and conscious about it. But I think in the end it served me to not stay stuck in situations that wasn't good for me. So yeah, thank you.
Great, thanks. Right, good. Donovan, let's get across to you next.
Thanks, Ivan. Morning, everyone. Yeah, I'm not sure if I can contribute, you know, in terms of the topic, but I was just thinking in terms of my career being in the construction industry. Normally when the building project starts, there's a big mess, there's chaos everywhere, sand, mud, rubble, and a lot of resources is being plowed in. It's almost like a bottomless pit, you know, human resources, capital resources, and you see nothing for it. And then suddenly, brick by brick, as this late, you start seeing something and eventually you see, oh, it looks like it's a building coming up, and then you know things are happening and it's going in the right direction, and then you are more confident and hopeful and positive. And then also in terms of my career, I also experienced what you can call tipping points where, working towards something and nothing happens. And then actually the reverse sometimes happens when you have less resources or less resources in terms of your network. You actually tend to achieve more and see better results, and to realize, the eventual result that you want out of your career. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Donovan. I don't know why you said you didn't have anything to contribute, because that was fantastic. So thanks very much for that. So good, right, Nazipa, let's get across to you next.
Hi, morning everyone. Thank you. I think in my personal life, my tipping point would probably have been when Moss had an accident, and how slowly every life just sort of changed thereafter, like from him losing his hearing to him getting better, to him going for brain surgeries, a whole lot of stuff that then happened thereafter, which is probably why I ended up even leaving the Free State and moving back to Durban. That's probably what I can think of. In that change, like that accident that happened, has literally gone and changed everything from my personal life to where I'm based, to where, his passing also went and changed my entire career, because we had been in business together. So I had to leave that business and go ahead and start afresh, a whole new life. In my career though, I still feel like I currently, I was having this conversation with Mpho last night, funny enough, and I was telling her how, I feel like I'm being prepared for a huge change that's coming. Like I'm feeling the shift. I feel it every day in my work, where as far as my career is concerned. So I'm excited, because I'm waiting to see what changes are coming about in my career too, because I don't know where I'm being thrown to, but again, I'm just leaning on the wave. That's where I am.
Great, thanks, Nazipa. Right, let's get across to the man of the flipping point. I don't know that tipping point has got much to do with his, but he tends to flip things. So let's see.
Yeah, flip it. I was just looking around for my Who Moved My Cheese book, and someone moved it. So I'm really angry at the moment. And then you reminded me of another great book there, Lee, The Tipping Point as well. That had fantastic research in it. But I think I absolutely concur with you with the numbers, but there are two different directions of this discussion. Let me just get to you, Lee, first. From a franchising point of view, I recognize that the tipping point in franchise operations was 20 outlets. From there, things just mushroomed. From a numbers perspective, I always felt that the tipping point in anything that you did was around 300, and Gladwell actually came back with the research on 150. I remember that. So it's a very important book to actually get through. And then to get to Jasper's point, as I was listening to people here, what went through my mind is that if you are actually leading in your own direction, and I think back to many things, I've always been an independent, I've always been at the front. If anyone turns around to me and says you can't do it, I say stuff it and I go. But the problem with getting into the front is that you get people who stab you in the back, because they actually, they can't stab you in the front. They're trying to catch you and they're trying to grab you back. And one of the interesting things, look, almost everyone that has actually ever stabbed me in the back went to jail. I can count 6 individuals that actually went to jail in major operations that I actually worked through. So for Cecile, you'll find this one a little bit funny. I was playing rugby. A guy was heading up a pharmaceutical operation. He asked me to come and join him. I joined him. Within 18 months, we actually just nailed everyone. I think we outstripped your performance. I actually don't know what company you were working for, Cecile. But we were blooming good. And there was a guy in that operation who was actually being exposed by the way that we'd actually built everything. And because of hierarchy in that particular company, I found the guy who introduced me the job of his dreams with one of my rugby mates. It shows you how relationships work. But the next guy in the hierarchy was this guy who'd been around for a couple of years. And within 3 months, he was trying to work me out of the situation. And he called me into his office one day and said, listen, I know your wife is pregnant and all this sort of thing, but I'm going to have to tell you the upline don't want you around, and I suggest you actually leave. So I did. I went home and I sat around the pool for a week. And the sales manager, or the national sales manager, he phoned me and said, how are things going down there? And I said, well, I thought you'd fired me. And he said, no, how am I going to fire my best person here? And he flew straight down and he fired the guy who actually put me to one side, and he appointed me in that particular position. Stabbing in the back, that's my tipping point. And it's happened many, many times. And I've got a button on the back of my back. If you press it, I'm just going to warn you, don't press it because you are gone. But that perhaps is an independent. Tipping points, my tipping point almost every 18 months, if someone actually stabs me in the back, somehow they get told off in the nicest possible way.
Thanks, Terry. Now I know why you move so fast. You're trying to avoid being stabbed in the back. So yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I just give one little example. You know, we've spoken about relationships a bit. Yeah, I mean, I had a situation as well. From 98 to 2003, we were building an organization. For those of you who are around, I told it when I told my story a bit. So we built up the structure for 4 companies, holding company and 4 subsidiary companies, which I was the chairman of. And in one of our board meetings in early 2003, one of my co-directors had made a statement that he didn't trust me. And that was a tipping point for me. I just dismantled everything from there. So I actually shut the entire thing down, hived off people in their different directions, and reestablished what I wanted to do with people that I did trust and people that trusted me. So yeah, I think it's key. And when it comes to relationships, you've got to know who you're working with and why you're working with them, and just to have people around because they appear to be, contributing is not necessarily the right thing. So yeah, that was a big one for me. But yeah, I think we'll probably wind up on that. So Lee, I think you've got a man on the spot again tomorrow. I wonder if he's ready.
Yeah, I did a little private chat, and Mpumelelo. So for those of you who haven't been part of the platform before, we've been doing every now and again, we asking people to share an article that they've written. It could have been years ago, it could be recent, but we don't know what the article will be about. It's simply the thinking of somebody on the group that we get is stimulated to stimulate our thoughts. So Mpumelelo is going to be reading his article tomorrow. And so we look forward to that. We hear his thoughts that get our thoughts going, and then we get to talk about it and share our ideas and thinking around it. So thanks, Mpumelelo, for being willing to do that. And we head off in that direction tomorrow.
Great. Thanks everyone. Have a fantastic day further, and we'll see you tomorrow. Cheers now.